The year is 1346, a pivotal moment in a long and bitter conflict known as the 100 Years' War. King Edward III of England has led his army on a devastating chevauchée across the Normandy countryside. This campaign of plunder and fire was a direct challenge to the authority of the French monarch, King Philip X. Philip, enraged by the audacity of the English invasion, summoned the great host of France to crush the intruders. Vastly outnumbered, Edward's army was weary, laden with spoils, and desperately seeking a way back to England. Finding his path of retreat blocked, Edward made a fateful decision to halt and offer battle on ground of his own choosing. He selected a gentle, rolling slope near the village of Crécy-en-Ponthieu, a position that offered a distinct defensive advantage. The English army, a mix of dismounted men-at-arms and their secret weapon, the longbowmen, prepared for the onslaught. They dug a series of small pits before their lines, a simple but effective measure to trip and funnel the charging French cavalry. As the massive French army approached, a sudden and violent summer thunderstorm erupted over the battlefield. The torrential rain soaked the ground, turning the gentle slope into a slick and treacherous quagmire. Crucially, the downpour slackened the strings of the thousands of Genoese crossbows, the prized mercenaries of the French army. The English archers, in contrast, had been ordered to unstring their bows, protecting the vital sinew from the damp. When the storm passed, the French vanguard, a glittering array of nobility, was impatient and disorganized. Against the advice of his more experienced commanders, Philip ordered the Genoese crossbowmen to advance and begin the attack. The mercenaries protested, arguing they were exhausted from a long march and that their weapons were compromised by the rain. Their pleas were dismissed, and they were forced to advance into the effective range of the English longbows. As they took their positions, they realized with horror that their large defensive shields, the pavises, had been left behind with the baggage train. The English archers, positioned in layered formations on the high ground, drew their bows in unison. With a single command, they unleashed the first volley, a storm of arrows that was said to darken the sky. The sound was a terrifying, high-pitched shriek that unnerved the advancing Genoese and their horses. The longbows, with a rate of fire many times that of the crossbows, created a continuous and deadly hail. The unprotected Genoese were slaughtered, their lines shredded by the relentless barrage of bodkin-tipped arrow. They broke and fled in a panicked rout, a wave of terror and confusion that crashed back into the French lines. The arrogant French knights, seeing the mercenaries flee, reacted with contempt and fury. They charged forward, trampling their own fleeing allies in their eagerness to get to grips with the English. This first French charge was disorganized, a piecemeal assault straight into the teeth of the arrow storm. The muddy, upward slope, churned by thousands of hooves, became a death trap, slowing the charge to a crawl. The English archers, calm and disciplined, picked their targets with chilling efficiency. They aimed for the horses, the larger and less armored targets, bringing them down in screaming heaps. Knights, trapped beneath their fallen mounts, were rendered helpless, easy prey for English men-at-arms to dispatch. Wave after wave of French cavalry, between 15 and 16 distinct charges, attempted to assault the English position. Each charge met the same devastating fate, melting away under the ceaseless volleys of arrows. The Count of Alençon, leading one of the main charges, was slain, a significant blow to French command and morale. The most poignant charge was that of the blind King John of Bohemia, an ally of the French. Desiring to strike at least one blow, he had his knights tie their bridles to his own. leading him into the fray. He and his loyal retainers charged into the heart of the battle, where they were all killed. As dusk began to fall, the French attacks finally lost their impetus, the army shattered and demoralized. The battlefield was a gruesome tableau of death, littered with the bodies of thousands of French nobles and soldiers. The English, by comparison, had suffered remarkably few casualties, a testament to their tactical superiority. King Edward III, who had commanded the battle from a windmill on a nearby ridge, had a panoramic view of his victory. His son, the 16-year-old Edward, the Black Prince, had commanded a division and won his spurs in the brutal fight. The Battle of Crécy was a stunning and decisive victory that sent shockwaves across Europe. It marked a revolutionary moment in the history of warfare, signaling the decline of the mounted knight. The battle demonstrated that a disciplined army of common infantry could defeat a larger, aristocratic cavalry force. The English longbowman, a yeoman farmer or craftsman, had proven more deadly than the wealthiest French noble. This social implication was as significant as the military one, challenging the very foundations of the feudal order. Victory allowed Edward to march unopposed to the strategic port of Calais, which he besieged and captured the following year. The psychological impact on the French was immense, a national humiliation that would fester for decades. The legacy of Crécy would echo throughout the 100 Years' War, solidifying the Longbows' fearsome reputation. The English had chosen their ground with masterful foresight, turning the landscape into an ally. The French, blinded by arrogance and a thirst for chivalric glory, had charged into a perfectly laid trap. The discipline of the English army, from the king down to the archer, was the bedrock of their success. They fought as a cohesive, professional unit, a stark contrast to the individualistic charges of the French. The longbow itself was a marvel of medieval engineering, crafted from the heartwood and sapwood of the yew tree. Wielding it effectively required immense strength, a lifetime of training that began in childhood. The archers developed powerful back and shoulder muscles, their bodies becoming part of the weapon system. The arrows were a yard long, fletched with goose feathers to ensure stable, accurate flight. The sheer number of arrows unleashed at Crécy, estimated in the hundreds of thousands, was unprecedented. This logistical feat, supplying so much ammunition, was as impressive as the victory itself. The French knights, encased in heavy plate armor, were slow and ponderous in the clinging mud. Their expensive protection offered little defense against the sheer volume of armor-piercing arrows. The battle raged for hours, a relentless cycle of futile French courage against disciplined English firepower. The English men-at-arms, dismounted and steady, formed a bristling wall of spears to finish any who broke through. At one point, the Black Prince's division was heavily pressed, prompting a call for reinforcements. King Edward, observing from his vantage point, famously replied, "Let the boy win his spurs." This display of confidence bolstered the English resolve, and the prince's line held firm. The slaughter only ceased when darkness made it impossible to distinguish friend from foe. The cries of the wounded and dying echoed across the field throughout the long, cold night. The following morning, English heralds and priests walked the battlefield to count the dead. The scale of the French losses was almost unbelievable. A whole generation of nobility wiped out. Crécy was a brutal lesson in the changing art of war, taught in blood. It shattered the chivalric ideal of warfare, replacing it with a more professional and ruthless calculus. The memory of the arrow storm would haunt the French psyche for generations to come. For the English, it became a foundational myth, a story of the underdog's triumph against the odds. The sun set on a scene of carnage. The fleur-de-lis of France trampled into the dirt. The English lion had roared, and its voice was the collective sound of 1,000 U-bows. In a single, bloody afternoon, the common man with his bow had humbled the proudest aristocracy in Europe. The battle was a calculated, efficient slaughter, a grim forerunner of modern, impersonal warfare. The English archers were not knights, but they were masters of their deadly craft, and that was what mattered. Their skill, their discipline, and their weapon had carried the day against overwhelming numbers. The French had relied on outdated tactics and a fatal dose of arrogance, a lesson learned at a terrible price. The war for the French crown would continue for many more decades, but the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The longbow had redrawn the tactical map of Europe, not with ink, but with the blood of nobility. Military commanders across the continent took note. The age of the cavalry charge was rapidly drawing to a close. The future of warfare belonged to disciplined infantry and the devastating power of ranged weapons. The Battle of Crécy was the bloody announcement of the end of the medieval knight's battlefield supremacy. The longbow was the instrument that composed this grim eulogy for an entire class of warrior. Its legacy is written not just in history books, but in the evolution of military strategy itself. It was a victory of strategy over brute force, of discipline over disorganized fury. The English had used the terrain as a weapon, the mud as an ally, and the rain as a gift of fortune. But it was the longbow, the simple stave of yew, that had been the ultimate arbiter of the battle. Its rapid, armor-piercing volleys had been a riddle the French cavalry could not solve. Their king was forced to flee the field in the darkness, a final humiliation for the French crown. The name Crécy would forever be synonymous with the devastating power of the English longbow. Battle was a brutal, but effective, lesson in the unforgiving art of war. It demonstrated that a smaller, well-led army could annihilate a larger, less coherent one. It proved that superior technology and tactics could triumph over sheer numbers and courage. The longbow was the key that unlocked this stunning English victory. It was the weapon that fundamentally altered the course of the 100 Years' War. The battle was a historical turning point, marking the ascendancy of the common soldier. The longbow, in the hands of a trained yeoman, became the symbol of this new and bloody era. The fields of Crécy were a bloody testament to the weapon's terrible and decisive power. The English archers had etched their names into the annals of history with their bowstrings. They were the men who had systematically dismantled the pride and power of French chivalry. Their victory was a symphony of skill, discipline, and deadly technological advantage. The longbow was their unforgiving instrument of war, and they had played it with lethal precision. The echoes of the Crécy arrow storm would be heard on European battlefields for a century to come. The longbow had irrevocably and violently changed the face of medieval warfare forever. The sun had truly set on the romanticized age of chivalry, its light extinguished by a hail of arrows. A new era had dawned, an era to be defined by infantry, firepower, and cold military calculation. The Battle of Crécy was its brutal and unforgettable baptism of fire. The English had demonstrated the awesome power of the longbow for all the world to see. And in the muddy fields of northern France, the world had learned its lesson in the most painful way imaginable. The French nobility lay dead or dying, their silken banners now serving as their shrouds in the mud. The English stood victorious on the hard-won hill, their longbows finally silent, their grim work done. The battle was over, but its profound and far-reaching legacy had only just begun to unfold. The story of Crécy is, and always will be, the story of the longbow's deadly and decisive impact. It is a story of how a simple weapon, in the hands of determined and skillful men, could redirect the river of history. The battle was a brutal, bloody, and utterly decisive victory for the English forces. And it was a victory owed, above all else, to the terrible power of the Longbow.